thank you all for coming to attend our Workforce Management in a Recessionary Environment webinar with Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe LLP, which I believe I'm 2 for 2 on all of the names in the firm. So my name is Craig Wilson. I'm the Managing Director of the Data Future Lab. And just to give you a really quick overview of who we are and what we do, is we are an incubator that is run in partnership with NYU Tandon and the city and the state of New York. And our whole goal is to grow entrepreneurship and technology in New York State and provide resources to support those companies and have a resource share with the greater technology ecosystem and NYU Tandon. So Orrick has been a long time and incredibly supportive partner of ours, and we rely on them for all of the legal work that we do, and we recommend them to all of our clients. And so they are, the leading law firm for early stage technology here in New York and globally as well. And so we have 2 actual experts with us, with me, to talk about what do we think about workforce management in an environment like this, not only in a recessionary environment, but a very unique environment in that we are working from home. Lisa and I were speaking earlier. What is a furlough? How does it work? How do you manage it? So with us, we have Lisa Lupion, and she's a partner at Orrick, where she regularly litigates a broad range of employment issues. And she helps companies of all stages on employment-related issues, HR policy, offer letters, severance agreements, wage and hour issues, compensation, termination. She is the expert here with us. And like last week, we also have Pete Fusco with us, who is the partner and the head of Orrick's New York Technology Companies Group. And he has been, he has particular expertise as he has seen this ecosystem through many downturns. So
now you're making me feel old.
Yeah. You're young, I assure you. Yeah, what is it? Young in heart? Is that more insulting or less insulting? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'll take it.
So to start, I think we'll just jump right into it. Again, I'll really quickly say that if there are any questions into the Q&A box, if we have time for them versus the chat, we won't be monitoring the chat panel. We will be monitoring the Q&A. So just to start, I think before we get into the less, maybe not less exciting, but less positive aspects of workforce management, particularly in recessionary environments, I wondered if we could talk a little bit about just do's and don'ts of managing people and performance and the types of stuff that we need to think about. How do we think about managing people and performance when we're working remotely? How do we think about all of these things and create an extremely positive work environment in a very, I think, weird time?
Yeah, I think weird time is the understatement of the day, the week. It's definitely challenging and unprecedented, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, there's a lot of things that we can do and we should do to keep business moving forward in a productive way. So this is going to sound so painfully obvious, but check in with your employees, have regular touch points with them, both because you want to actually manage your employees, right? We want to make sure that people are hitting their deliverables, have the support they need to actually get work done, and that you could address the issues before they fester. So one of the things that there's more pressure on everybody now to deliver. We have to do more with less. We have to be super productive, advancing our goals, whatever those goals are. And so make sure that you're having regular touch-ins with your employees. And if there's an issue, address it fast. If someone's supposed to have delivered that piece of the project and they didn't do it, find out why. Is it because there's home distractions, and how can you as the employer help through that? Is it modifying the schedule? All right, fine, you can't get it to me by 5 o'clock because you have all this other stuff you're dealing with now. I get that. but then let's find a new way so that we could manage the team around those issues that you're dealing with. So those are all things that you need to have a conversation about. And then you don't want to be paying people who are not delivering the work, right? That's the part of that's the downside of the recessionary part. So the only way that you're going to be able to effectively manage performance is to be managing it early and document it. And so I don't mean by documenting it like put together a written review every time you have to talk to someone about anything. That's overkill, that's not productive, and you don't have the time for it. But if you are dealing with someone who's not meeting your deliverables or who's not like producing the work product in the way or in the timeline that you want it, shoot them a written email as opposed to just a text messages that will be lost and gone forever, or a Slack that will be gone forever. Shoot them an email and just say, hey, just wanted to follow up on X, Y, and Z after our conversation. Those are really important to effectively performance manage and minimizing legal risks down the line if you get to a point where this is not going to be a productive continued employment situation.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up question on that? If there's an answer for either of you guys, is, you know, in a time like this when we are constantly being recorded on, you know, whether it's being broadcasted via a webinar and then will go up, you know, on YouTube, or whether we're just taking Zoom calls all day, you know, how much is too much? How do you balance, and how do you think about how much is too much, you know, Zoom calling, and how much is too little, and what might you recommend around saying like, okay, we're only going to do one Zoom call, maybe we'll do phone call check-ins? Like, how do you keep motivation up? And maybe more importantly, I think we all have these days where we feel like we were on Zoom calls and we did 12 hours of work and we realized that we were just on Zoom calls for 12 hours and that there wasn't actually that much work that got done.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think we are a little bit zoomed out, you know, like there was a lot of requirement to be on, you know, and focus on, we all want to connect and be together and happy hour at this time. And, you know, so there is a lot. So I think it's a balance. And maybe if you're in crunch time because you have a particular deliverable that's about to get done, or you're hitting like a big moment in a project, like that's not the best time to do as many Zoom calls. And maybe then the touch points should be more informal, right? I'm just shooting an email or Slack and just saying, how are we doing on this component of the project? And the more, you know, the Zoom calls on the happy hours for when you complete that part of the project. But you know, I know what I'm doing with my own teams and recommending to all of our clients is ask people what's helpful, because different teams and frankly, this keeps going on, needs shift as this continues. And so having an open dialogue and letting people know that, you know, we want to help you, so tell us what would be helpful, is a great way both to keep up like being part of the solution, and then just to your point, when is too many Zoom calls? So having that dialogue and keeping an open dialogue, I think is really important. Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So maybe what we can do now, just to transition to something, you know, as we move beyond, you know, performance, obviously people need to take leave, and also people will need to take PTO, paid time off. And so can you walk us through a little bit of, and this is strange when we're all working, when many of us are working remotely, I think, can you take us through some of those leave obligations and talk a little bit about paid time off and actually taking off, and what that and, you know, talk about accruals and all these sorts of things. I think it's a complicated thing that people don't think about that often until you're working from home all the time.
Yeah. So maybe before we even talk about taking time off, let's talk about what you have to do to the people who are working, and that's pay them. So there, and it sounds so obvious, but you don't know how many conversations I've had since this remote working situation started, where people sort of feel, well, they're at home, and I'm like, well, they're doing work for you, so you still have to pay them. So to be clear, like the wage and hour obligation still applies. So you still have to pay everybody for hours worked, but it's hours worked. So one thing that we have gotten some guidance on from the Department of Labor is, so let's say now, normally I work 9 to 5, but now because I have to monitor my kid's Zoom class smack in the middle of the day, I'm less productive in that time period. my day might have shifted. I might be 9 to 11 of work, and then 11 to 2 I'm dealing with Zoom classes, and then 2 to later in the day I'm working. And the Department of Labor said, like, we get that, and we don't have to look from the start of the day to when you log off last to determine how many hours you worked. It's how many hours you're actually working. So my midday Zoom break to deal with, remote learning, and I will use air quotes for that because it's working out well, but when you're not actually doing employer facing work, we're not working for the benefit of your employer, of your company, then that count towards working time. But anytime that you are working, whether it's at home, whether it's in your home office on your bed, it doesn't matter. All of that still is compensable time under the law. So, which leads me to what happens if someone can't work, because you have to pay them if they are working, but if they can't work because either they got sick or because they have family obligations, there are some increased legal obligations now. Federal government, New York State, a bunch of other city and states have come up with COVID-specific leave obligations. So everyone's been talking a lot about the CARES Act, and one component of the CARES Act is the Families First, some other letters, FFCRA. It's a enhanced leave law for employers to provide. The first 10 days of this potential leave is for sick leave. So that is if an employee has COVID-19 or is caring for a person that has COVID-19 or has symptoms but not yet a diagnosis of COVID-19, they get these 10 days of sick leave. Then there's a 12-week FMLA leave available for someone who's taking care of a child and therefore cannot work. They're unable to work. So that doesn't mean I need to shift from 11 to 2 because I'm dealing with those Zoom classes. It's cannot work at all because I'm dealing with these kids situation. There is a 12-week period of job protected leave under this expanded FMLA leave. So, but one big exception that I think is relevant for a lot of growing companies, there is a small business exemption. If you have fewer than 50 employees and demonstrate that it would be a really significant hardship. There's some factors to that, but that's the essence of it. You really can't survive if you give somebody off 12 weeks, then you could fall within this small business exemption that protects you from having to provide this 12-week leave period. It doesn't prevent you from having to do the 10-day sick days, right? So if somebody is actually sick with COVID, that they do have statutory protections there.
Right.
And then there's also because no government speaks to each other and ensures that there's a coherence. If New York did its own thing. And so New York also has COVID specific sick time. That's for someone who's actually under stay home and not work because they're sick. And there's 3 buckets of different New York leaves. There's if you work for an employer with 10 or fewer employees as of January 1, 2020. So that's the measuring threshold. Then you don't get any new leave. If you're 10 or fewer and you made more than $1 million in revenue, then you get 5 days of paid sick leave. 11 to 99 employees, 5 days of paid sick leave, more than 114 equivalent of weeks of pay.
Got it.
Those are your New York. One last leave thing, and then we could move to other topics. And I see you have questions. New York City has sick leave obligations also. They're not COVID specific, but they're out there. And that includes things like someone's school is shut down, someone needs to go check to see if they're sick, goes to a doctor. Those are paid sick leave obligations that have already existed under New York City law. So those are all reasons why someone might actually get protected time off to deal with COVID related or other health related issues.
Sure. And so what I would say to all of those watching here, and then folks who are going to be watching on the video afterwards, is some of that minutia, go back and find the video. You can hear a lot of the specific details and whether or not that's going to apply to you. That'll be extremely helpful. So if we could kind of switch to PTO, paid time off, I think what I'll say for, you know, what we've talked about among our own Future Labs team is making sure that people do find the time to take time off. We are quarantined. Many of us cannot leave our apartments, but, you know, mentally taking time off is still healthy and good for your team. So that aside, just for having managers and folks who are, you know, working with their teams, encouraging good mental health and taking some time away from work is, you know, let's talk about PTO and some of the implications that come with having a ton of extra paid time off. And it will probably transition us into where we start getting into laying off and furloughing and some of the less exciting but extremely necessary pieces of this. Yeah.
So I don't think that the mental health component of this should be disregarded, because I think part of having a productive workforce is ensuring that these issues are being met. Mm-hmm. So there is something to be said for, you know, these unplugged days, or people are calling them to mental health days, you know, rest on us, whatever these days are. There's all kinds of reasons why, from a morale and productivity sense, that having people take PTO is a good thing. Then there's the legal side of it. So depending on what your PTO policy is, folks are accruing lots of time and it's sitting in a big bank. And depending on what your policy says, if your policy says we pay out accrued but unused PTO at the time of termination, if you're going to be in that situation where you might have to be reducing headcount, you're paying out that very large bucket of PTO time that now people are building up. Some of your PTO policies might say carryover days. You could keep building, and you're going to carry it over until 2021. And now people are going to have boatloads of time to take in 2021, which hopefully we're through this, the health crisis, we're all back to work. You want people to be meaningfully engaged and not cashing in on, you know, 46 days of accrued PTO once everyone's finally back at work. So both from the cost perspective and from the morale perspective, encouraging people, and frankly, even requiring, sounds too, you know, draconian of a word, but requiring people to take PTO, take a day in June, take days in June, whenever you want, as you see fit. We understand that you're not vacationing the way you might have thought, but it's important for lots of reasons to, and from an employer standpoint, it's good to keep that PTO bank in check.
Right. It's where we recommend people camp in their backyard, perhaps.
Right. Exactly.
Awesome. That's really helpful. And again, you know, the only thing that I would reiterate is just stressing that PTO is it's just mentally so important for everyone, and particularly for your teams. And so I know we're in an extremely strange time where many folks are quarantined, but definitely, you know, encourage folks to feel comfortable taking a day off and taking paid time off, even if they're not going anywhere. I think it'll help everyone's mental health.
I agree. And track it when they do take it. So if employees are, you know, PTO day because for mental health reasons, because they have some obligation at home, whatever it might be, make sure it's getting recorded the same way it would if they're not coming into the office because they need to do some personal business. I think that's one of those areas where you might have to remind your employees that if you're not working that day, that's a PTO day the same way it is if you were not coming into the office. It's not like just because we can't see you, that doesn't mean it doesn't count towards PTO.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So we're going to talk layoffs. I think it's time. You know, for everyone here and for everyone who's going to watch, I think we know that we all believe our companies are going to change the world, and I'm sure that they will. But there come times where even the strongest companies have to make layoffs, as you have probably, as many of you have probably seen, Uber, enormous publicly traded company, is laying off thousands of people in order to sort of get their costs under control. So it's an inevitable piece of running a company. It's certainly not a fun piece, but maybe we can talk through layoffs, just a little bit more of the minutia, the processes that we can put in place so we can have those employees retain their dignity even whilst they're being laid off. And so you can also do right by all those employees that you are laying off. And then, I'll just add the caveat of separations packages, severance. How do people think about all of these things as they navigate what will be an extremely difficult decision for them?
Yeah, they are difficult decisions, and you can do them right. They're never going to be easy, right? So when you're telling someone you're separating with them, no matter how well it's handled, it is a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
I think the other piece is not just pure cost cutting, but there's a lot of businesses, big and small, that are pivoting. We were really focused on investing in this one area, and now for a whole host of reasons, that area is just not focus anymore for 2020 or 2021, or that just doesn't feel right anymore. And so the team of people focused on that area might be valuable. So, you might want to repurpose people. So if they have a skill set that's transferable to other aspects of your business, great. And I always would suggest trying to use your known talent in ways that are most beneficial before you're cutting employees. But at some point you might have to. And so the process does matter. So when you're thinking of who you're going to be terminating as part of a reduction in force, what are the selection criteria? Are you going to be saying, well, this business line no longer makes sense, and so we're going to get rid of everybody in the business line, or this project no longer is going to make sense, so we're going to get rid of everyone in this project. We thought we were going to get this investment, it hasn't come through, so we're going to get rid of everybody who was going to be supported by that investment. Or we're going to do 10% across the board. We're going to cut 10% of our employees across the board. Or we're going to be doing the most recent hires are going to be terminated first, right? Sometimes it's last in, first out. All of those are reasonable ways to think about who's going to be terminated, but be consistent in that approach, because the risk of termination. So back up a second. Employment at will. That means that you could hire someone for any reason or no reason, so long as it's not a discriminatory reason. But you raise your legal risks if you can't articulate a consistent reason that you applied to everybody. If you see 4 people and you applied the same criteria to all 4, well, then if that person says, well, no, it must be because of my race, gender, age, whatever they say, well, no, we applied criteria to all 4. So having a consistent approach is really important when you're making these really tough decisions.
Sure.
And then you mentioned severance and what you can do.
Yeah. And then one thing that I just may add on our own experience too, and from talking to folks who have run people operations for a handful of companies, is be very aware of single points of failure positions. Like, you only have one person doing a particular task and a particular function at your job. Is, when you look through that list, make sure to identify those single points of failure when you think thoughtfully around your layoffs. That's the only thing I would just quickly add as a personal, as an experience from talking to some folks who are running people ops for companies.
No, it's a great point, because you do want to be thoughtful around. And that might be a situation where you could repurpose people. So you have someone who one component of their job is that really important thing that no one else at your company is now doing. Can you salvage that task and then repurpose the remaining functions to other aspects of the business? So point. And then in terms of severance, for the most part, you don't have any legal obligation to provide severance. For the most part, you have not check what you said you were going to do at the time you hired the person. So I don't want to grossly overstate. Maybe some of you have put into your offer letters, not on my advice, but on your own advice, that to put in severance, and now you're if you contracted that you were going to pay severance, you do have to honor that contractual commitment.
Yeah.
Contract to it. You didn't say anything. You gave an offer letter, employment at will. You're ready to part ways. You have the discretion as a company to decide what, if any, severance you're going to offer. There's a lot of reasons why you would want to offer severance. From a legal perspective, if you offer severance, you could get a release of all claims in exchange for that severance. So that's nice, because then you have no risk of outstanding issues. You're offering something, they sign a release, it puts that issue to bed. So that is from a legal perspective. I think in this environment, there's also just, if you can afford to, it is nice to be able to help someone, bridge someone a little bit until maybe their next job. And when you're thinking of what a separation package might look like, one thing that's being thought about often is if you could provide COBRA benefits, if the company could pick up the COBRA benefits for a month or 2 months following termination, because health insurance is that much more, frankly, scary for people right now.
For sure.
So it's like a very, I think that people really would like, it feels better, like thinking of how to help someone separate, knowing that they don't have to worry about their health insurance would encourage them to want to sign a release, and frankly, to feel better about the difficult circumstance they're in. So severance is one component, COBRA coverage is one component. A package might look like. Yeah. Last thought on that is, just like you have to be consistent in how you're selecting people, you want to be consistent in what you're offering. So you don't want to be doing, well, this person I really, really thought was great and I feel particularly bad, so I'm going to give them more than everybody else. You want to have a consistent approach to whether it's X number of weeks per year or month of service, whatever your kind of formula is going to be, applying that with some consistency.
Do you have any sort of a two-part question? Do you have any recommendations or what you've seen on a standard amount of time for severance, or alternative to that, any resources that are that these folks can go to help them determine what's best for their company?
So no-ish. So it's really hard. We are in unprecedented times. So I think we used to hear a lot, 2 weeks per year of service, 2-week floor plus 2 weeks of service. Or I don't want to say standard, but common formulas that were used at the time of separation. But now I'm hearing both extremes. I'm hearing companies trying to be extremely generous if they can, because they feel particularly, like it just feels difficult. It's more difficult. It was always difficult. It's more difficult in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, it's hard. So I'm hearing one extreme of like trying to be more generous. Definitely that COBRA piece. And then I honestly, like, I'm hearing the other extreme where frankly companies just can't afford it. And if your decision between eliminating one more person to cut the cost so you could pay the severance, like, that doesn't feel like the right balance. You don't want to be eliminating more people just so you could afford to pay the people you're losing severance. You want to invest as much in the people that you could keep as possible. So
I've also seen, I guess from a comparative standpoint between between 2000 and 2008, I'm seeing a lot of companies that maybe they're not paying severance because they don't have the money, but they're kind of doing what they can if there was health insurance provided to make sure they're covering COBRA or some type of health insurance for folks, so that people aren't just separated and kind of out in the wind. I've seen a lot of companies focused on that as they're doing layoffs and thinking about how to at least maintain health insurance for people. So they're, so in this environment, they're, they're not totally on their own.
The other health benefit that I'm hearing employers talk about is talking to, like, if you work with a PEO, talking about whether people could stay on the employee assistance program post-termination date to deal with like mental health and wellness issues following separation for some period of time because of the extreme circumstances. So that's another thing that I've seen employers exploring now that might not otherwise have been a standard part of their separation package.
Right. So people are getting creative with how to do best by their terminated or laid off employees and still enable them to sort of have some safety net. I think Pete, the health insurance and Lisa, the health insurance point is a really great one. I think that is, one of the top, three, if not the top worry for employees that have been laid off is, what are they going to do with health insurance? So that's really interesting and heartening to see that folks are starting to do that. And then maybe we'll bring up the F word, furlough.
Which F word are you bringing up?
Yeah, furlough.
Wow,
The one that
sideways.
Yeah, the one that everyone hears and nobody. I think some people know exactly what it is. I think a lot of people don't know what it is. It's kind of the other side of the same coin of layoffs, but very distinctly different. So can we just start at the very highest of levels to understand exactly what a furlough is and then how to manage doing it and then plan for folks coming back if they're going to? I think, we think that we know what it is, but I'm not sure that we really know exactly what it is.
And nobody really knew exactly what it was in the private sector. It really was more of a public sector concept. So you would hear about all the government workers were furloughed because some budget didn't get approved in time. So federal workers, whatever it was, it really existed almost exclusively in the public sector and some unionized places. So if you were a union shop, then you could be furloughed. But what a furlough is, like in basic terms, it's a temporary layoff or a temporary suspension of work. You're telling someone for a period of a defined time, not indefinitely, not forever, but for this period of time, we have no work for you and we're not going to pay you and you're not going to work for us. You will come back. We have every expectation for you to come back after the end of that defined period of time. So that's like what a furlough is. So just look about like when you want to use it. I think some companies are a little mixed up, right? So they don't want to fire people. They don't want to riff people. So they're furloughing people. No, it sounds better in some ways, and I understand that from a morale standpoint. But if you don't have an intention and don't think you will bring that employer, that population of employees back, don't furlough them. Like, you're not doing anyone a favor. That's not what a furlough is.
It's a great point.
So use it when it's right. Like if you thought you were going to be launching this big project, you're not launching, launch date got pushed for 3 months, project is ready to go, but you can't do anything with it right now. Furlough the team for 3 months and bring them back on, gearing up for launch date, right? Like, to me, that makes perfect sense. You're saving employees, you're not paying them. Like, that is kind of a good solution for that problem. If you just don't see this business taking off, this part of your business taking off, don't furlough. You could always rehire people. It doesn't prevent you from rehiring, but you're not doing anyone a favor by furloughing them. And legally, it's the same. If you furlough someone without an intention of bringing them back, you fire them. You could call it furlough, but everyone else will call it fired. So.
Yeah. Okay, that is extremely helpful. I think people, I think there is a bit of miscommunication around furlough versus laying off, and I think I've seen companies that have furloughed employees not in our own portfolio, but I've seen companies furloughing employees that I think I'm not sure if they plan to bring back, and so it's confusing for the entrepreneurs to understand which is appropriate for particular circumstances. And obviously, your point is very salient, that it's usually reserved for government employees, or at least that is how we usually know of it. And it's a relatively new phenomenon for the private sector. So that's incredibly helpful. So now that we have that covered, I'd love to talk about a few of the other ways in which companies can think about cost cutting that aren't furloughs and layoffs. So what are some of the things that companies can do or companies can be aware of and entrepreneurs can be aware of to help save runway and cost cut while still retaining as many employees as they possibly can?
Yep. So one other thing, similar to a furlough, but it's not a real furlough, but it sometimes gets looped into that furlough conversation or furlough umbrella, is reducing. So we're all going to be off on Fridays. We're going to work 4 days a week. So you are furloughed on Friday, or you're on flex time, or a reduced schedule, a 4-day schedule 80%, whatever you call it. Similar concept. You are reducing someone's schedule and pay to help manage costs, and because of the reduced workflow. Just for both furlough and for a reduced work schedule, folks can be eligible for unemployment if they are working fewer than 4 days a week and they do not earn over the maximum rate of $504 per week. That's the New York threshold.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
there might be some partial unemployment that will kick in for either furloughed or for reduced schedule.
Can I quickly ask if that 504 a week is pre or post tax?
You could ask. I can't answer. No, I think it is. I think it is pre-tax. I think it's gross.
Okay, great.
Is my sense.
No, that's helpful. So we can. I mean, a tactical Google search should also be able to figure that out. So as long as it's on some radar.
Yes and no. Just on unemployment. The New York State Department of Labor and every other state Department of Labor is incredibly underwater. They have a lot of resources coming in where people are being redeployed from other aspects of government offices to now become unemployment claims experts. They're not experts. There are new people who are feeding into the system, like the gig economy, independent contractors who were never eligible, who are now eligible under the CARES Act. It is an overloaded system. And one thing that I would just recommend for people for employers who are terminating, furloughing, reducing headcount, don't make any promises on unemployment. There's a whole host of reasons that a claim might get denied. They might have worked for you for 3 months, but they need to have a longer track record of employment to qualify. You don't want to speak to that. You have no control over it. So you can make information available. You could say apply for it. You certainly should give anyone the information they need, like, a letter confirming that they were terminated as of this date, a letter confirming that they're furloughed as of this date. But please don't say anything about what the State Department of Labor is going to do, because I don't even think the State Department of Labor necessarily knows what they're going to do. So don't speak for them because you have no control over it. So that's my plug on what not to say about unemployment.
That's great.
Okay, other things to do to potentially cost cuts. So I'm hearing a lot about like across the board pay cuts. Everyone at the company will reduce their salary by 10%. Everyone at this level to this level will be reduced by 15%, this level to this by 5%, whatever it is, all different kinds of cuts. So the one thing to be mindful about that is announcing the salary reduction before you do it.
Right.
You cannot retroactively reduce someone's salaries. So my suggestion is, okay, you tell someone effective June 1, your salary is going to be reduced X amount. Your new salary rate is going to be Y amount. So do it in advance. And my preference is to do it on a clean pay period. You don't have half a pay period with one rate and half a pay period with another rate.
Right.
So in advance and before that start of the new pay cycle. Some other like cost cutting things that you could think about, cutting overtime for anyone who's overtime, just telling people in advance, absent extreme circumstances or extraordinary circumstances, we're not going to approve any overtime. So you got to get your job done in 40 hours in a week. Hiring freezes. So we're not going to expand our headcount right now. Repurpose people who might be underutilized, but don't add to your existing headcount. PTO, having people take their PTO, similar to other conversation, there is a cost benefit to that.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone's going to take a day on, in June or whatever it might be. And then cutting ties with either temps or contractors that are not on your direct like employee headcount, but are a cost to you. So thinking whether that might be another way of reducing costs.
Totally. So I think if we could distill these, a lot of these lessons is just over communicate on all of these things, whether it be furloughs, layoffs, pay cuts, anything that you're doing to sort of manage the costs at your company. It's critical to over communicate all of these decisions and over communicate them in advance, so you can not surprise employees by this, and B, just make sure you're doing it in a way that is fair to them and to you.
Absolutely. And just be consistent in all of these decisions. We talked about that on layoffs, but that also needs to be true on, pay cuts or furloughs or reduced hours. That doesn't mean that you have to have the same rule for every single employee at the company, but if you have people who do the same thing in the same team on the same project, those 3 people should be like treated, and you shouldn't be making distinctions amongst them without, good business principled reasons that you could justify down the line.
Of course. So I think I'd like to spend our last time, since we're kind of getting toward the end, just talking, and this was a great thing for you to bring up earlier, Lisa, when we were talking, is returning to work. I think it's an open question as to what's going on, how do we come back, what is New York State thinking? And I would just like to say a disclaimer from all of us, do what is most safe for you and most safe for your employees. And as we're having this conversation, we're having it looking into the future, because we have to plan for when that day may come. It will come eventually. We don't know when that day will be, but it will come. And so thinking in advance how to plan properly for that. So yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about what you know and return to work issues and how we might think about coming back and sort of what you've heard.
Yep. So there's so much information, and also in some ways not enough information all at the same time. And we're recording this, so just to be clear, this is whatever exists as of today, May 20th.
Yeah.
This has been a moving target, and that is really frustrating for businesses that are trying to plan into the future, because I'm saying one thing today, and by tomorrow I'm like, remember what I said yesterday? Totally not true. So it is quickly moving, and so it's one of those things that you do have to be flexible on. But a couple of things that are kind of guiding principles as we think about it, and then I want to talk a little bit about what New York has said so far. There's lots of different uncoordinated sources of information that you are required to adhere to. So OSHA is another one of these things that we don't typically talk about in office settings, but OSHA is the government agency responsible for keeping work sites safe. And there's this general duty clause that applies to all employers, not just factories and mines, that you have to keep your employees safe. And that was easy when we were just sitting in our desks. It is far more complicated now when you're trying to keep people safe from a global pandemic, right? Like that is a lot harder to accomplish. But not that much guidance on how to keep an employee safe, except you have to look at all the other guidance out there. So the CDC has lots of guidance. And actually, I think as of this morning, just issued a new 60-page bulletin on coming, re-engaging with the world, and there's a section on employers and companies and what they should be thinking about. So then you have the CDC overlay, and you have to adhere to the CDC, and then you have state and local guidance, and of course there too you're not getting consistent guidance. And then you have what New York has announced. So New York is doing a phased approach to reopening. There's the regional approach, so you cannot even consider opening unless and until your region has been cleared to open because you satisfied all of the 7 health metrics that the governor has announced. New York City is not yet checked all 7 boxes. But like the capital region has, Finger Lakes, different regions. once your region, so once New York City, for example, is cleared from the health standpoint, then it moves into industry-specific phases. So phase one is agriculture, construction, retail, but only curbside retail,
Right.
manufacturing, wholesale, trade. Phase two is professional services, administrative support, retail, real retail, and real estate. Phase three is restaurants and food. Phase four, art, entertainment, recreation, and education. Broadly speaking, those are these phases. Some parts of New York State are in phase one.
Okay.
New York City is not yet there. There's going to be a minimum of 2 weeks between phases, but it could be more than that.
Okay.
No region of New York is yet into phase two. But I did want to spend a minute talking about what we know New York has required of phase one employee entities, because it's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of things that we're going to have to do. And I think it is helpful to start thinking about it because it's a lot. So for example, providing face coverings for all, cloth masks for all employees and making sure that wear it questionably, whether it's all the time or only if you cannot be separated by 6 feet, because the nature of the industries that have been moved into phase one and the guidance we see so far, it's not really office settings yet. That'll be phase two. So we don't have clear guidance, but thinking about face coverings, thinking about re-engineering your office space. If everyone was in close together on one desk, that not work under lots of different guidance. So how are you going to separate people by 6 feet? Thinking about the types of meetings you used to hold, to how many people were there, and whether you're going to be able to do those virtually, because even once we're reopened, large meetings in person are a much later phase of this multi-phase process. Thinking about things like there was regulations around there's not going to be any more shared lunches. So like if you used to bring in lunch and everyone would, be grabbing out of the same pizza box or the same, buffet style lunch, like the guidance that the state has issued, New York State has issued so far says no more on that. And keep thinking about who you interact with outside of your direct employee population. So do you have lots of meetings with investors, or do you have like partnering entities that you work with, because you will probably have some obligation to keep track of who you're interacting with, to keep health issues that either you or they might be experiencing. And then a big thing is screening employees before they're allowed to come back to work. Now that might mean temperature screening, daily temperature screens, whether it means self-temperature checking every morning and reporting that in some way, or someone's going to be at the door to your office with one of those, things that you don't actually touch someone with, but you stand from far away and you check their temperature and log it. Health questionnaires on a daily basis, certifying that you don't have any symptoms of COVID. COVID-19 testing is permissible for employees before they go back to work. It is not it's not specifically required by the state. It is permissible, but it's things that you should be thinking about. Are you going to require everybody to get testing? Just a word on antibody testing, because it's so popular to talk about it. I would caution right now, the EEOC has said that you can do COVID-19 testing and temperature testing because you can do reliable health testing in the context of a global pandemic. Right now, that doesn't mean tomorrow will be a different answer, but right now antibody testing is not considered reliable health testing because we don't really know what the results mean. So
excellent point.
I know it's a lot of stuff and a lot of things to think about, but I just kind of wanted to get you thinking about what you might have to do when it's time to reopen your offices.
Yeah, I would echo that on the antibody testing. Just we don't know, there's not enough information to know whether or not it's effective and whether or not we can get the novel coronavirus again within an amount of weeks or months from when from when someone had first contracted it. So we're not sure what the effectiveness of antibody testing is quite yet. Obviously, there will be a lot of changes, probably, starting from today and on. But just I would also urge everyone to be as up to date as you possibly can on sort of the peer-reviewed scientific evidence around these sorts of things. But yeah, that's exactly right. So I guess, just to kind of wrap us up really toward the end, because I think this was a lot of information, but it was incredibly valuable, is that, our main takeaways are over communicate, sort of over research your options, and you'll be in much better shape than before. I don't know if you guys have any particular sort of quick last thoughts on this before we let everyone go.
I guess my last thought would just be consistent on all these things: performance managing, PTO days, terminations, furloughs, health screening. Be consistent on how you're applying it across your employees, because that does mitigate a lot of legal risks on the back end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on my end, it's being prepared. Plan for, work with your counsel, plan for what you're going to do, and present it in an organized manner. Sometimes people panic and, do things, and we're going to lay everybody off, or, they do things out of panic, and it just creates issues. The more structured approach you can have, and the more informed approach, the better for things like this.
Great. So preparation, consistency, and communication. Those will be our three big takeaways from workforce management in a recessionary environment. So as mentioned, this is going to be posted so it can be viewable after the fact. For those that are watching this on that, welcome here. But I just want to say thank you again to Peter and Lisa. We appreciate you taking your time with us. And for everyone else, we have this again in 1 week from today. Same time, same place, but it's mergers and acquisitions in a recessionary environment. And there has been some activity in the last few weeks that we can kind of talk a little bit about. But thank you all again. Stay sane and stay healthy. And thank you guys again for being with us.